and talk for just about an hour or so about what does public policy work look like for us at the coalition level here in Colorado. And while that video that we love so much is focused on federal legislation, our state legislation is not that much different in terms of the local process. So we're going to talk a little bit about process today and talk a little bit about why it is important for you as our membership organizations to participate in the public policy work that we do and do on your behalf across the state of Colorado. So again, my name is Lydia Waligorski, and I am the Public Policy Director for the Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and I'm here today with Rana.
And I'm Rana Simmons. I'm the new Director of Policy for the Colorado Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Excellent. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time for my incessant coughing and the frog in my throat. Please do use the chat box. If you are going through and you have any questions, just type them in and say hi, and then we will answer those questions at the end of today's webinar. So clicking through to my next slide. Oh, great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about our public policy work in terms of why it matters. And again, we cannot thank you enough for participating today and participating in the work that we do as public policy directors and as we work with the coalition. So all of our public policy work truly comes from our membership. And so we work on your behalf, working at the statewide and in some cases the federal level to make sure that you have the tools that you need to be able to help the survivors that you serve every day. And so the work that you do and the problems that you face and the issues that you bring to us as experts in the field that come to us when you say, hey, this is a problem, I think I want to work on this. You are the eyes and ears and the troops on the ground that absolutely inform the work that we do. And so we hope that you are here today to learn a little bit more about the process. We're going to give you tools starting today, but then certainly throughout the legislative session, throughout the year, about how you can be empowered to work with us, how you can start, what you can and can't do as a 501c3, and certainly where you can find some more information.
So I'm going to take over for this first part of the webinar, and what we're going to do first is just get back to basics when it comes to the general legislative rules. So I guess first and foremost, we only have 120 days in the session to introduce legislation, to have it go to committee, to hopefully pass legislation, and that is an enormous amount of work to get done in a very small time. So this year, session begins on January 13th. So we are getting ready to hit it full gear. And so I guess what's also important is that legislators are limited to only being able to put forth 5 bills per member, and there are some exceptions to that. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty. We're just going to do a general outline of these legislative rules, and then we're really going to focus on how a bill becomes a law. So in addition to that, there are strict deadlines set by the Legislative Council when we're talking about bill introduction, committee hearings, the passage in each house, and then I guess another thing that is important for us to know is that both chambers, a bill must pass through both chambers, an identical bill, and then be signed by or let become law by the governor. So Colorado is a bicameral legislature composed of the Colorado House of Representatives and the Colorado Senate. And so what we wanted to do was point out here what the 2016 composition of both houses look like. So in order for any legislation to pass, we need a majority vote, and what that looks like in the House of Representatives is 33 votes, and in the Senate, 18 votes need to pass. And so now we are going to discuss how a bill becomes a law. And if you are a visual learner, this is a really great tool for us to use as far as what that process, what that legislative process looks like. But if you're maybe like me, this kind of looks a little bit confusing. And so we broke it down into our friend Bill again, and something that is a little bit more simple to read. So what Lydia and I are going to do is just kind of go through this process and give some more context for each one of these steps so that we can learn how a bill becomes a law and be better informed when we're looking at the legislative process as the session goes through. So the first step is that oftentimes a legislator will have their own bill ideas. However, many other sources are responsible for providing ideas for the bills to include constituents, special interest groups, committee recommendations, or department needs. And members of these groups often ask legislators to sponsor the bills promoting their interests. So what we wanted to do here was kind of take a moment, especially on this step one, because this is where we're really drawing upon our membership. And we wanted to talk about timing too. So even though the session is only 120 days long, we are working, we're doing policy work throughout the summer, throughout the fall, year long, getting ready for the session. And so the concepts for bills are usually worked on, for months or if not a year before a bill is drafted. For example, if CCASA and CCADV prioritize a bill, it is usually because sometime during the spring or summer of the year before the start of session, our members, have identified a problem and have identified the problem needs a legislative fix rather than a change in procedure or other policy. So the planning and the timing for most bills happens well before the legislative session begins throughout the summer and all year long, and it is common to have stakeholder meetings over the summer and fall months in preparation to create the bill draft. These meetings attempt to engage key stakeholders in the process of finding legislative solutions to the priorities that you, our members, identify as issues impacting survivors. So we wanted to talk to you a little bit about the stakeholder process and like who those stakeholders are. And many of these folks are people who increase the credibility of our efforts. They implement interventions or direct services central to the bill's concept. And there are those folks who advocate for changes in institutions and to institutionalize these efforts. The stakeholder process utilizes a community-based planning to create an infrastructure to support the planning process and foster long-term collaboration between members to achieve legislative success come January. So I wanted to take a moment here and just ask Lydia about her experience with the stakeholder process, maybe a recent experience that you have with cultivating support for legislation.
Sure, and I hope this piece about the legislative stakeholder process is one of the most familiar parts of this webinar to you and the most familiar parts of our process, because truly everything we do policy-wise at the state coalition level comes from our membership. And so when we send out surveys to you throughout the year saying, what are you seeing? What do we need to work on next? What should be our policy priorities? That's how we inform the work that we do, and that's how we inform which bills that we're going to be the primary supporters of and to really work on. And like Rana said, some of those bills can take months to years. You cannot start a stakeholder process too early, and I don't think you can be too broad in the number of people and the level and quantity of people of who you engage in that stakeholder process. For example, many of you have already heard that we are working on a strangulation bill this year. That process started almost 2 years ago, and almost 2 years ago we started hearing from advocates across the state that a lot of strangulation cases were coming in and they were only being charged as third-degree assault, which is a misdemeanor cases, or they were not being recognized or charged at all. And so with that stakeholder process, we started with the advocates that we knew, we started with the district attorneys that we knew, we engaged law enforcement, we engaged SANE nurses, and different groups across the state got together, started pinpointing what are the problems here, and is this something that needs a legislative fix, or is this something that we can change in on the ground practice? When we decide it's a legislative fix, that's when we start to really work through some of the nuts and bolts of that, because going into your first draft, you want to pretty much have it figured out. You want to make sure that you've got people on board, you've got momentum, you've got a bill sponsor, you've got people that believe in the bill, and so you craft the best possible piece of information you can before you go into your drafting process. And that's when the bill drafter will come in, and then he'll make sure that it works with the current existing law and put it into the right format.
Right, and so, and like Lydia was talking about, you all are the experts in the field, and so we really rely and value on your input to prioritize the different bills that are going forward and to really help us like take a stance on whether we are actively supporting bills or actively opposing. And so everything is membership led when it comes to the different bills that are moving forward in the session. And so like Lydia was just talking about with the drafting, that's step 2. And once a legislator has an idea in mind, the next step is to simply record that idea on paper in a prescribed format. And that's essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about drafting a bill. So the legislator who begins to move the bill through the legislative process is known as the prime sponsor. The prime sponsor may introduce the bill independently or seek other legislators to act as co-sponsors of the bill. So at this point, we're at step 3, right? The bill has been drafted and we're talking about introductions. So each bill is given a number that designates the proposed piece of legislation for the remainder of the legislative session. All bills are sent to a committee immediately following introduction or first reading, and committees are often regarded as the, and I'm doing bunny fingers right now, as the workshop of the General Assembly. And we're going to get into that a little bit later, talking about what the committee actually does. And so now if we move on to step 4, these processes are kind of happening at the same time. So once the bill is introduced, then it's also assigned to a committee and it goes through the fiscal note process. So even though we have this in kind of like a chronological order, know that sometimes these are happening simultaneously. And when we're talking about the fiscal note it essentially explains how the proposed piece of legislation impacts the expenditures of state agencies and state tax revenue. The fiscal note provides a summary of each bill, describes how proposal changes current law, and estimates the amount of state funding and new staff needed to implement the change. The fiscal note is a decision-making tool for legislators and others to use when deliberating state policy. In the House of Representatives, it requires that each bill be accompanied by a fiscal note before a bill can be referred out to committee of reference. And in the Senate, a fiscal note is required before a bill can be passed on second reading. And then also, a fiscal note may just be the simple statement that there is no fiscal impact of the bill. So that's kind of what that process looks like. And as that is going on, the bill has also been referred to committee. So that takes us to step 5. And so once the bill is assigned to one or more committee for a detailed review, the committee meetings are open to the public and interested citizens are able to express their views on the proposed legislation during these meetings. This is where we'll need you to testify at hearings or help identify appropriate individuals to testify, either survivors or professionals in the field whose expertise might help to shape legislative decision making. After study and hearings and research and discussion, a bill may be amended, recommended for passage, referred to another committee, postponed indefinitely, or laid over for consideration later in the legislative session. So we wanted to pause here and just take a moment about testimony and talk about what your role looks like or could look like if you're wanting to engage in the public policy work of the coalitions.
So a lot of the times, many of you are familiar with us begging and pleading for folks to come to Denver and to provide testimony on these bills, because especially for the work that we do, which is often technically difficult to explain to people, a lot of decisions are made on an emotional level, whereas we're able to bring survivors to the Capitol and we're able to compellingly tell a story about why these laws and why these policies and procedures matter to the survivors that we serve, and nothing gets that across more than someone that has that real world experience. You have that real world experience. Now, Rana and I are both long time advocates in the field, seasoned advocates in the field, and have our own experiences drawn. But we also, when we get a testimony, we're giving that statewide kind of that 25,000 foot, 50-foot level, right? We give a nice broad overview of how this policy fits into everything else. What we need from our members, what we need from individual survivors is telling your story and coming to the Capitol and telling your truth and talking about how this will impact you on a daily basis. And each bill goes through at least 2 committee hearings. And so we actually would ask you to come twice. You can use the same testimony in both houses. And we are here to help prepare you and to prepare survivors and survivors you serve to get you ready to testify. It's very unlike testifying in court. It's typically, people say it's not that nerve-wracking compared to a courtroom experience. You typically have 3 minutes to read your statement. We will help you prepare a written statement. If you get nervous, you can just read what you need to know. We are there for you. We will walk you to the Capitol, walk you through it, provide you with lip gloss, hold your coat, get you coffee, whatever we need to do to make you feel supported in that. And for every bill that we support and some that we oppose, we will typically do that twice, depending on where the bill is in the process.
Right. So thank you for sharing that. And so that's the crucial element of testimony and how we can really help to shape decision making for legislators when they're debating the bills that are moving throughout the process. And so getting back to that process, we're on step 5.5. And so that is appropriations, and that's really talking about, again, going back to the fiscal note process. And so essentially, if a bill is identified as requiring an appropriation, and by appropriation what I mean here is the authority to spend money or to increase staff, then it's referred to the Committee on Appropriations. And basically all that means is that appropriations is debating whether or not the state can afford to have this bill come to fruition. So it's looking at the reports from the fiscal note process, and it's looking at the budget and deciding, is this something that we can actually afford to implement? And so if the bill continues on out of appropriations, then and Lydia's laughing because sometimes that's where the train stops, but hopefully we have really great testimony and that's coupled with appropriations and it moves forward. And then we get to step 6, which we're talking about the second reading. So once reviewed by the Committee on Appropriations, the bill is read a second time by its prime sponsor on the House or Senate floor, where amendments to the bill are discussed and debated. And this is important too. We're going to pause for a moment and talk about amendments. But the entire membership of the House or Senate becomes a committee coined, and I'm doing bunny ears again, the Committee of the Whole, for the purpose of debating the bill for a second reading. This is a really key point in the legislative process when legislators may make substantial amendments to the bill. The entire House considers the bill, the actions taken by the committee of reference, and any other amendment to the bill. Occasionally, the bill is sent back to the committee to which it was originally referred or to a different committee. And so after the Committee of the Whole has completed its calendar of second reading bills, it reports to the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate. The report explains whether the bill was passed, amended, defeated, laid over until another day, or referred back to committee. And the membership of the body votes on acceptance of this report, and roll call votes are recorded on amendments to the report. So we wanted to pause here too and just talk about the importance of amendments, because sometimes the bill that is initially presented is not what sifts through at the end result of this process.
Yes, amendments are tricky, and they can occur really at almost any point in the process. And so when we send out our information to you throughout the session, we update a sheet about once a week that says where we are on supporting different bills. And sometimes you'll see that support change from maybe it's an active support to a monitor to a active oppose even. And a lot of that has to do with not the primary bills introduced, but the amendments that were placed onto the bill. And so sometimes we go and testify on just the amendment saying, you know, this would be a great bill if it did this. And so we would support this amendment, or we cannot support this bill unless something about it fundamentally changes. And so if you see things that happen during session and you see our support change, that's usually meaning that there's been an amendment somewhere in the process that makes the bill palatable so that we're okay with it, or gets us to a point where we have to unfortunately oppose a bill.
Right, right. So next in the process, we're going to be talking about the third reading. And the third reading is when a final vote is taken on the bill from each chamber, so both from the House and the Senate. And commonly, this is given less time to debate on the third reading, and amendments are generally not made. This is the time that a recorded vote is made on the bill for final passage. So that's kind of what the entire process looks like in the first house, and then it goes to the second house, which is going to be our step 8. And so after a measure passes in one house, it is sent to the second for consideration through the exact same process. For example, if a bill is first introduced in the House of Representatives and passes, it is then sent to the Senate for consideration. A bill must pass through both bodies in the same form before it can be presented to and signed by the governor or let pass into law. So what we're going to do here is kind of just skip ahead because it's the exact same process, essentially. And we're going to go to step 13. Which is talking about conference committee. And this is when there are occasions when the version of the bill adopted in the first house differs from that adopted by the second house. And when this happens, there are 3 options available. So the first option being the prime sponsor of the bill may request that his or her chamber recede its position and adopt the bill version of the other house. The second is that the prime sponsor of the bill may request that his or her chamber adhere to its position, so essentially stand their ground, which may effectively kill the bill unless the other house recedes its version. Or third, the third option being that the prime sponsor of the bill may request that a conference committee be appointed to reconcile the differences between the 2 versions of the bill. So whichever option is selected must be approved by a majority vote in both chambers, and if the prime sponsor requests a conference committee, 3 members are appointed from each house to form that conference committee on the bill. The report generated from the conference committee is taken to each house to be presented and voted on. And if reconciliation is able to occur, then we finally get to step 14, and that is after a bill is passed in its identical form by the legislature, so by both houses, it is then sent to the governor, who may sign it into law, let it take effect without his or her signature, or veto the bill. And if approved, our bill finally becomes a law, just like you heard and saw in the song in the beginning of this webinar. So that is kind of a in-depth look at what the process is for how a bill becomes a law, and again, where you play a key and vital role in helping legislators to make decisions about whether a bill is able to pass into law or whether it does not come to fruition throughout the session. So
absolutely. And so because it's January, because it's the beginning of legislative session, and because that's where we get a lot of questions, and this is the super crazy kind of active time for both of us, we decided to start with, you know, what's going on in terms of the legislative piece. But we really want to talk a little bit about our overall policy work and why it's so important for our members to participate in our policy work year-round, but then especially in session. And you know, we know your time is valuable. We know it's hard to jump on a webinar, and so because that's kind of our pressing need, we wanted to start there. But all of this, the legislative piece and the bill pieces of it, fit into that overall policy work, and we get a lot of questions in terms of, well, what is public policy? It sounds like this crazy, big, scary thing, and it's really not. And what can I do and what can I not do as somebody that works for a charitable organization, or as the IRS calls us, a lovely 501c3 type of organization. So we're going to go over just a little bit of this today. We're going to have a chance next week at the second part of this through the CCADV brown bag to talk more in depth about those IRS requirements and about direct lobbying and grassroots lobbying and advocacy and how all those three great things play together. But knowing that it's hard for you to take time out, we're going to go over this basically today now. So certainly you can contact us if you have more information. So basically, what do we say when we talk about public policy work, right? So it is anything, it's just courses of action. It's really anything that has to deal with regulatory measures, laws, funding, priorities, given a topic and brought forth from some sort of governmental entity or its representatives. And so public policy work can be anything from my local sheriff's department has an internal policy that they're going to do X, Y, and Z when somebody reports a sexual assault. So, or somebody reports an act of domestic violence. That is public policy, right? So it's a government agency and they're saying, here's our course of action. Here's what we do. And so you as advocates are not unfamiliar. You probably do this every day. You interact with that level of public policy saying, hey, Sheriff, I've got an idea on how we can improve this, or have we considered this? And so these are things that you do as advocates. And so you are already involved in public policy as an advocate, I guarantee it. With multiple systems, because we know that you do the same thing with the medical personnel. You do the same thing with the school district sometimes, or whatever sort of agency or entity, you're already engaging in this. And so we really want to give you a sense of being empowered and helping you engage at both your local level, which you do a great job of every day, and then taking that great work and that expertise up to the state and to the federal level. So it's also, and here's some examples. So we talk about regulatory measures, right? So technical assistance to membership, right? So Ron and I, we spend a lot of time throughout the year working on technical assistance, as we all do at the coalition level. And so this is when, hey, what about this sheriff's policy? I don't know if I like it, or this is really good. Maybe we should do it in the county next to me. So we work on this at the state level to kind of weed out what best practices are and to work on that. The regulatory measures, and so, an example of this is, sometimes Department of Regulatory agencies, and they oversee our doctors, our nurses, our, teachers, our, last year, the private investigators were going through a rulemaking process, and they had just become licensed to the state, and so we weighed in on what their best practices should be and what those regulatory considerations should be as they went forward and professionalized their role. And so we work with those agencies. Sometimes it's a rule or a policy or an internal policy at Department of Human Services. And when interacting with Department of Human Services, sometimes you'll hear the caseworker say, well, is that in rule or is it in statute? So those things that are in rule, both of those are public policy work. The things that are in quote unquote rule, and now I'm making the bunny ears, those are things that advocacy takes care of and can work at the local and the state level, and then the statute is more of the legislative work. But all of that is under the same umbrella. And so when we talk about public policy, we're talking about the whole shebang, okay? And so getting down into that, let's talk about that rule versus statute and what some actual lobbying is, okay? So generally speaking, lobbying is any attempt to influence, right? It's influencing the passage, defeat, amendment, introduction of bills, both at the federal and the state legislature, bond issues, referendums, ballot initiatives, or constitutional amendments. And then at the executive level, it's Senate confirmation for executive branch nominees. And when I think of this, I think the best example I can think of is when there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court, right? And so some of you might have written in a few years ago and said, hey, I like this guy, or I like this gal, or not, that kind of stuff. So for it to be lobbying, and we'll talk a lot more about this at the brown bag, it's a two-pronged test, right? It has to be, there's an introduced piece of legislation or a bill or something. Something's got to be there. And it's got to be an attempt to influence that. And so it's got to be, there's a bill out there and I like it, so I want you to vote for it, versus I'm concerned about this topic. Right?
And this is how my expertise may inform that topic.
Exactly. And so the statute of limitations for sexual assault is coming up for discussion this year in the legislature. And so talking to an elected representative is saying, I hear the statute of limitations is coming up for review in the legislature, is advocacy, and you can have that conversation. But when you start talking about, hey, there's a bill by Rhonda Fields and I support it, that becomes lobbying. So while it is a fine line, it's also a two-pronged test. And so we're going to dive more into that on January 12th, and we are certainly here at any time to answer your questions about that. When we send out action alerts and we send out things that we want you to do, we try to be very clear in terms of what is advocacy and what is lobbying for that. And so, if it's an action alert saying we want you to contact somebody, it's probably lobbying. When it's an action alert saying, hey, this just got introduced, that's more of a direct grassroots kind of, it could be either one. But we will certainly let you know as those things come up, whether or not it's lobbying or whether or not it's advocacy. And the IRS is the one that kind of sets these definitions for us. Okay, so the IRS, and this is really complicated, we're going to get more in the nitty-gritty on this on January 12th, really talks about advocacy, direct lobbying, and grassroots lobbying, talks about all three. What I want you to know, what I want you to take away from, is that the bare minimum that the IRS has rules around this for nonprofits really speaks to and suggests the need for nonprofits to engage in this process, right? Mm-hmm. So the fact that there's rules out there and the IRS says, hey, you nonprofit, I want you to be able to do this, and we're going to set some limitations and rules on that, really speaks to the understanding of we are the ones that have to give that information and to kind of fill that void of information, right? And so we are expected to, and it's completely okay for us to engage in the decision-making process, for us to say, we have a need as advocates, we have a need for our survivors, and we want to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, or we want you to not cut VOCA, or the Victims of Crime Act. I'm sure you all saw the action alert for the great news.
You got that.
Great work on that. So we're recognized for this. We know that this is a need. The IRS and the federal government knows that this is a need. It is absolutely okay for you to lobby and for you to participate in the process within limits. And I assure you, you are all well within the limits. We will make sure that you understand where that line is and are able to do it, okay? So what does the IRS say is advocacy, right? So the advocacy piece is generally those attempts to influence the administration rules, regulations, or other executive branch actions. And so if we're talking about the DORA rulemaking process, or we're talking about DVP or something from the sex assault world.
SOMD?
Right, perfect. The sexual assault, sexual offender management board.
Yes.
All of their rules and regulations and things like that. If we're working on those policies and procedures, that's advocacy. That's totally fine. Again, no legislation is introduced. We're just working on the rules, right? So if I write a letter to my congressperson and say, hey, so the Department of Justice just put out a new rule and I would like you to look into this regulation. and weigh in on our behalf, that's advocacy. That's totally okay. And you'll see this, and so and the Federal Register on the federal level, you will see bills and rules about FIPSA and different administration things come out. When they change the rules, they put it in the Federal Register and say, hey, open comment, right? And then we get to go in as state coalitions, and you get to go in as experts in the field and say, this rule is going to be difficult because, or this is going to be good because, I want you to change it because, right? All of that's advocacy. All of that is something that is already passed. It's just making sure that we get the rules and the regs right. And you are absolutely allowed to do that without limitation, okay? So again, because the feds recognize that you absolutely can lobby, and there are limits to that. There are two ways, and so you can do the expenditure test, which is the whole what part of the budget may be spent on lobbying, and the question is a lovely governmental vague and insubstantial portion. So this chart, while it may be a little bit confusing, we're going to go through things again and on the 12th, but basically, you know, as long as you're talking about your exempt funds, right? And so you cannot spend government funds or your federal dollars, your VAWA, your VOCA, your FIPSA, those kind of monies on lobbying, out of your unrestricted funds. And for the folks of you that do fundraising, or for our directors out there that are joining us today, you know what those are, right? So your unrestricted funds, you can spend up to 20% of those on lobbying. Most agencies did not spend anywhere near that amount. And so that's the beauty of the state coalition, is that Ronna and I get to spend a lot of our time on lobbying, but even our time on lobbying probably does not reach the 20% of our unrestricted funds budget, and we're very careful about how we do that. And really, it goes to a reporting requirement with the IRS. But I promise you, we're not going to ask any one of you to lobby so much that we're going to ever put you in danger of exceeding this rule. It's going to be okay, and we'll certainly talk more about that when we have time to talk about that. So that's where that's at. So absolutely allowed. Please respond to action alerts and feel free to participate in the process. So there are some prohibited activities, right? And I want to bring this up, especially now because we roll into an election year, because a lot of the prohibited activities revolve around candidates and the use of government funds. And when we think about government funds, I also want us to think about not just the dollars, but also the time that we spend at work in the office. And so when it comes to candidates, everything should be on your time. Everything should not be on your work computer.
Right.
Not on your work phone, after hours.
Not on your lunch break.
Not on your if you're out in your car and your personal cell phone, go for it. But be careful around candidates, and be careful about the time that you use, government fund wise. But basically, here's some do's and don'ts that we provided for you. And again, anytime that you have questions about this, we're going to email you after this a bunch of hard copy resources that you can look things up on. And then, of course, Sean and I are always available for phone calls, okay? So in terms of you on your work time clock, again, if it's your own time, it's 10 o'clock at night, you're not on call, go, and you're not on your work computer, you didn't take your laptop home that your agency purchased, you're fine. Okay? If you're at work, or if you're the communications director at work, these are some do's and don'ts, right? So forward emails or other information that relates to non-electoral activities, right? But if it talks about a candidate, if it endorses or opposes a political candidate, especially at this time of year, and where we're at in the federal legislative cycle, kind of stay away from that, right? You can share posts on Facebook and Twitter that relate to non-electoral activities. And so again, the Don't Cut VOCA campaign, which we did the Twitter storms and everything else, is a great example of had the hashtags. And so all that stuff you can do. If it's hashtag don't support candidate XYZ, problem. If it's support or don't support a piece of legislation, that's okay. Okay. Link to the website of a political organization in order to share information that is educational in nature, as long as the direct page you're linking to does not include information that supports or opposes candidates for public office. So if you want to link on your work website to NNEDV, the sexual assault equivalent,
the National Sexual Assault Resource Center.
Perfect. So if you want to link to those groups, awesome. If you want to link to a think tank or something like that that does good policy work, that's fine. But the second that link goes towards supporting a candidate, it's bad news. So yeah, okay. Again, political organization to research, educate, or lobby. Don't work in coalition with political organization to research, educate, or lobby. Okay. Give something of value to a political organization if it is paid for at fair market value or exchange for something of equal or more value and made available to any political entity. So this is a little bit with the campaigning, and I think this question comes up a little bit. And so you absolutely can do congressional visits. If somebody is already in office, no matter what party they are, if that's your elected representative, you can invite them to your shelter, or your agency. You can do a tour. You can take them for a tour at the hospital, or whatever you want to do. If you want to give them a mug or a T-shirt or a souvenir, I think the state level is like $48 or something like that. Some keychain, whatever, you're fine. Okay. If you want to give them a Maserati, we're in the wrong business. So don't do that. So you can do that. But it has to be anything of value too, right? And so it's not always material things, but the thing of value is, your contacts and your donor bases are all super valuable, right? And so we don't do that to political entities. If you have candidates, and you can invite candidates, but you have to make sure you invite every candidate of every party, right? And so that you are broad, and it can't look like you are supporting or opposing. But really, I feel like most people just do for people that are already sitting elected officials, right? Okay. Okay, for private citizens in your own time, have fun. You are an expert, right? You are advocates. You have sat with people. You have sat with survivors. You have formal training and knowledge. You can give your opinion as a private citizen to a political organization. And you can say, yes, I've been through X amount of training, and this is my opinion. You cannot do it as an employee or representative of that organization to a political organization. And so if I say, I, Lydia Wologorski, have been an advocate for X amount of years, and here's what I say about sex assault, that's okay as a private citizen, as long as I am off of the clock and not using any of my work resources. I cannot say, I, as public policy director for the state coalition, give this opinion to a political organization. Okay. You can, as a private citizen, donate to whoever you want to, as long as you're not donating in the name of your organization. Okay. Okay, so the fun part. Here's how you get to be involved at the coalition level, and we so hope that you do this. And so we've mentioned a couple times in this webinar that we will send out action alerts. Of course, we send out more during session than any other time of the year as things move super fast. There are some days where we've just come from a committee hearing, and we come back to our computer and we send out an action alert, and they come out all. I try to send them out on Tuesday mornings, people, but that's not always possible. So we'll send out an action alert. The action alert will ask you to do something. It will most likely be lobbying. We will ask you to contact people. We will ask you to get the word out. We will ask you to bring up a topic with somebody. Now, if we're asking you to bring up a topic, again, Is that lobbying or is that advocacy? If it's just a topic, it might be advocacy and you might be okay. You're also okay if it's lobbying, but we'll talk about the reporting requirements on the 12th. Okay, so the action alerts are going to be, you know, I try to make them super simple, and so sometimes it's, here's a suggested Facebook post, here's something you can tweet, here's a talking point for if you make a call, here's a letter that you can copy, cut, and paste and send. And I will let you know in that action alert whether or not, and you can choose too. You can send that letter as an individual private person. Don't print at your work computer. Or you can put it on letterhead and send it as your agency. Both are fine, depending on your limits. But again, you're not going to exceed the limits, and so you're going to be okay. So we have the action alerts, and certainly there's different ways to participate in that throughout session. CICASA, you guys also, you do great action alerts too, and we'll post those all over on social media and then send those out to members as well. So we would try not to duplicate action alerts, and so typically sometimes we have different bills, obviously, right? And so there are a lot of bills that we pair up on. There are a lot of bills that are more sex assault specific and DV specific. And so if we had something that was about a bill that we were both actively supporting, we would try to work together to make sure that you weren't inundated with stuff through the session. Okay, so there's that piece of it, and please look for them as they come out, okay? So the other way to get involved, and this is probably what most people think of when they think about engaging with CICASA and CCADV, is participating in our public policy committees. And so we put up the meeting times for you here, and so I cannot say enough how much we rely on your expertise in making these policy decisions. And so policy team looks a little different in session than it does out of session. Out of session, we talk about great big ideas for fixing things. In session, sometimes it is reactive, and sometimes it's nitty gritty, and a lot of it is determining our position on a bill. Last year, we looked at and analyzed at CCADV. I looked and analyzed over it was nearly 200 bills, right? And so some of them come in and they're identified for us and they kind of tangentially touch on us and we say, nope, it's okay. Some of them come in and we debate it in committee, and some things we come in and we say we need to passively support or passively oppose by not lending our, well, we're not really passively opposed. If we're going to oppose a bill, we're going to oppose a bill. I should say that. We monitor so passively oppose our bills and say we'll keep an eye on it. If it gets any worse, we'll jump in there. So you'll see that, and so we will send out to you, and we post on our CCADV website a running list of both the bill title and a link to that bill, and then our position on those bills. And so as session goes through, if you hear of something that you think of as of interest to us, let us know and talk to us. And so many bills are introduced. While we absolutely try to stay on top of everything, sometimes things get introduced and they may or may not be on our radar. And so as you hear things that either delight you or concern you, let us know, or look it up on the website and make sure that we are working on that bill, because again, we truly do take direction from you, our members. So there's certainly that piece of it. And public policy team, we always have a call-in option, and so we want this to be statewide, and we know that not everybody can travel to Denver, especially in winter in session.
In the middle of the day.
In the middle of the day, to participate, and so there is a call-in option, and we both make every effort to make that as participatory as possible for folks on the phone. Okay. And another plea for this, but first I want to come back to hot tips a little bit. And so hot tips for people that want to be involved, that are maybe can't commit to being on the standing committee, maybe want to be involved but can't make it to Denver to participate. Lots of ways for you to do so, right? Action alerts, Facebook, social media. We've actually had, and I always support this, and so our legislative body tries to be super transparent, and one of the things they do that by is everything is public, right? And so if there's more than 3 legislators in the same room, it has to be a public conversation. The hearings are live. It's a live feed on your computer. And that is not lobbying for you to listen to a live feed on your work computer. You can absolutely do that. You can absolutely know what's going on, look at the news, whatever you need to do. Totally fine. That's a live feed going on right there. You can listen to that, and as things come up, or you're like, oh, I don't like that point that they made. I disagree with that. Send us a note, right? And so Rhonda and I are probably down at the Capitol listening to that live or getting ready to testify.
Thinking the same thing as you.
Thinking the same thing as you, exactly. And writing it into our comments, like, rebut this comment. But you can actually participate that way too. And so you can send us an email, you can text us if you want to get really involved, or you can write your comments on, hey, I heard this is concerning to me, can we please bring up this point? You can also then contact your legislator and bring up that point that you heard online, and say, hey, I heard this, and I don't think this is quite right, or people make up what they don't know sometimes, right? And we know from working in sexual assault and domestic violence that there's a lot of myths about what violence against women really looks like. And if we're not the ones, the experts in the field down there talking about, no, that's not quite right, that's kind of a rape myth, people make that stuff up and they go with what they know, and they do it with good intentions, but they don't work with survivors like we do. They just really don't quite have the same perspective, right? And so we are there to give that perspective. We rely on you to lend us that perspective and to share that information with us so that we can share it with other people.
And be representative of survivors.
And ultimately be representative of survivors. And so you can always listen online. It also airs late night on a different channel. If you miss something,
if you're on call,
if you're yeah, if you're in shelter and it's midnight, it's on TV somewhere. So you can always, don't be afraid to contact us. If there's an action alert and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm really nervous about calling somebody, which you shouldn't be. It's a citizen legislature. They're people. It's okay. But if you are, and I totally get that you might be, their voicemail works 24 hours. And you can absolutely call after 6 o'clock at night, leave a message. They'll get it the next day. And it's okay. You can participate that way too. So you never have to talk to a live person if you don't want to talk to a live person. And honestly, we've been advocates. Sometimes that's all you have time for, and that's okay. That's completely all right. So you can leave a message. It absolutely matters how many people contact legislators on one particular idea. Okay, very few people actually contact them on legislation. I cannot stress enough how much of a difference even 20 contacts makes. Their aides and their folks keep track of how many times they're contacted, both pro and con. And I'm telling you folks, 20 emails or calls or voicemails, that's an outcry for the state legislature. And those things get listened to, and it has so much more power than you realize, especially if you call and say, I am a constituent. I elected you, and here's my concern. Call me back, or don't, or please follow up with Rhonda and Lydia and let me know how it goes. And so you have that power as constituents, and we rely on you to use that, and ultimately your survivors rely on you to use that. Unless you're participating in the public policy process, you're missing an opportunity to really complete your mission. And of course, our mission is to end violence, right? And so this is how we do it. This is how we engage the decision makers to actually effectuate that mission. And so we really, truly rely on you to do that. Okay. So I think just a quick summary.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we don't have any questions in the chat box, folks. So this is your last call for questions. Please type something up if you need something, or we absolutely have our emails here on the next page. Here's what we look like. So,
hi, everyone.
Hi. So, these both link directly to our emails.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, or they will if they do it already. So we'll send out this PowerPoint and some additional information. Please, if you have any questions about either the legislative process or overall policy work, don't hesitate to contact us at any time. It's what we're here for. Our job is to support you and to support your missions, and we will work together to do that throughout the year. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. This is Agueda. Thank you for attending the webinar today. Thank you to Lydia and Rana for such a very for providing us all this very important information. We will be sending PowerPoints and handouts later on through the week through email. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week. Bye.